Hi, I'm Brandon,
And I'm Mom.
and welcome back here to Tansson Talks TV.
Yes, thank you for joining us again today.
Yeah, I always enjoy doing this, and Mom, how are you doing today this April?
Brandon, I am doing just fine. As you can see, it's a bright sunny day, and I'm doing fine. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, very excited to kick off another new month, and I know we're doing something a little different this month.
Yes, Brandon, we sure are. We are considering this Animation April.
Yes, and so for this Animation April, we are going to be covering a slew of amazing animated shows. And Mom, which one are we speaking about here today?
We're going for a classic today, Brandon. We're going to talk about Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, specifically, we're speaking about Scooby-Doo, Where Are You, that aired in 1969 to 1970. And yeah, I'm very excited for us to get into this. This one came out September 13th of 1969.
Yes. And I'll give a little background for the first episode. Once more, we are going to tackle the premiere episode. And so, in this episode, we first meet Shaggy and Scooby, and they discover a truck while they're walking. In the truck, they do discover there is a knight in it, meaning Knight knight. There is a knight that is in the truck. And of course, it frightens them, so they go run off. They come back with the gang later, and they notice that the knight is still there, and there's also a box in the back of the truck. The knight's head has fallen off, so there's no one in the knight costume at this time. So anyway, they see that there is a box in the back of the truck, and they see an address, and so they decide to deliver the knight's costume per se to the museum where it belongs. So they do deliver the night costume, and the curator there is kind of he thanks the group for delivering it, but he also lets them know that the person who was supposed to deliver it never made it there. So they're wondering what's happened to this particular gentleman, and because it was a special delivery from England, this night costume. And then he goes on to tell the tale of the night costume itself and how it is haunted. Um, the gang leaves. They do leave the museum, and while they're leaving, they notice that Scooby has taken something from the museum, basically some glasses, but they're specific magnifying glasses that look a little different than than other magnifying glasses. So they then proceed to go to the library. They go to the library. They look up these magnifying glasses and realize they are made specifically in England. And so they decide to return well, not necessarily to return, but they think something suspicious is going on. So they go back to the museum. And while they're instead of walking into the front of the museum, they decide to break into the museum to see what's going on. And so you know, they break into the museum, they go in and they look around. And of course, they see the knight is there, and it starts to move around while they're there. And so, but they also find while they're looking around secret room or passageway slash room. And in this particular room, they notice there are paintings there. And some paintings, and they're basically two identical pictures. One, the original picture, the other one is a picture of where you could tell someone's duplicating the painting. And so and just by looking at all these clues, they are able to figure out what is going on at this particular time period. And so of course, the knight comes out of nowhere and chases them around. And at some point in time, the knight kind of falls down, and y'all have to watch the episode to see how the knight falls down. But anyway, so they capture the knight. And then they pull the hood off. So spoiler alert, we find out it's the curator of the museum, the person they were speaking to earlier. And then and the police are called, and they explain about how the pictures were being duplicated, and that really was what was going on. The crime was that they were duplicating art pieces, and I guess maybe they were selling the originals. Anyway, then the question is, well, what happens to the gentleman? What happened to the gentleman who was supposed to deliver the night costume? And so Scooby remembers seeing a shoe, And so Scooby goes and he leads them to the person who's tied up, and they pull the head off of whatever creature he's supposed to be. And they discover the true gentleman is there. And he also kind of talks a little bit about the story, about what he kind of discovered in the museum, also. And that, in essence, is the episode, Brandon.
Well, Mom, thank you so much for the synopsis.
Oh, you are welcome, Bran.
Yes, and I definitely enjoyed hearing about the episode What a Night for a Night. No pun intended. And Mom, I'll let you go right into your top 10 list.
Alrighty. So I would try to decide a little bit if I wanted to change my top 10 to kind of make it cartoony. And instead, I said, well, Scooby Doo kind of ran as a series anyway. So I said, well, let's just go ahead and look at the top 10 things that I think were important to note based upon this first episode, kind of like I've done previously. And so this is what I've noticed by watching the first episode. First of all, the group solves mysteries, and there are five of them in the group. Um, this and so the first episode I think is interesting because it alludes to them doing this previously as mystery solvers. I mean, the van itself is called the Mystery Machine, so I guess that's what they do in their spare time is solve mysteries. We learn that Shaggy and Scooby like to eat. We also learn that Shaggy is a ventriloquist. I would have to watch future episodes to see if that pops up again. I just can't recall. We learned that the mystery machine kind of has everything in it. For example, it had a ladder, it had a cranker. So whatever, apparently this mystery machine just is just loaded full of goodies. Um, we know that Scooby and Shaggy do not like anything scary or out of the ordinary. We learned that the ages of the group are unclear. They allude to, they meaning I think it was Daphne or Velma, one of the two, allude to the fact that Shaggy is athletic in school, or they refer to him in the school sense. So I don't know if that means that they're supposed to be in high school, which leads to other weird questions about them, or whether or not they're supposed to be college students, and this is just them grown up. I don't know, but anyway, they do allude to them in school. As I mentioned, they mentioned that Shaggy is athletic. We know that Scooby speaks sometimes. And then we also, and Scooby's a dog, for those of you who don't know. And we also know that uh, we kind of wonder, do they seek crimes or do the crimes seek them? I guess that's the big overall question for it. And Brandon, those are my top 10.
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for your top 10.
Yes, yes, sir.
Yeah, and analyzing this a little bit further. So, oftentimes for first episodes, as you know, we oftentimes see a lot of setting the scene and yeah, and trying to find out a little bit about the characters. And we didn't really get that in the conventional way in terms of this episode. So for the most part, we didn't really even know anybody's names per se, at least as in them saying them. Aside from generally about a once, for each of the characters. And I don't remember catching Fred's name ever being mentioned, but it might have, but I don't remember it. So they may have only said it once, but yeah, I mean, it definitely was an enjoyable episode in the first for this legendary franchise, and yeah, but I'm actually going to go ahead and lead into our discussion.
All right. And typically we ask, what do we know about the show? And I'll speak first, Brandon. I know quite a bit. I do, well, I should say, from probably the originals anyway. I did watch the show when I was younger. I remember watching the show when I was in daycare. And so, and so the show stood out for me. I know I've seen the show in reruns multiple, and I'll emphasize in reruns multiple times. I've seen the show, or at least the original version. I have not seen it recently, so it was nice to go back and watch the first episode again. We both ended up watching it twice, so I can catch everything that kind of went on. And so, it might be something I pick up again just to kind of watch here and there. How about you, Brandon?
Yeah, so for me, I've definitely seen this whole series, and there's been numerous different versions of the Scooby-Doo franchise that has gone on, from 1969 to present, almost 55 years in September. that this franchise has been around. But in terms of the original show, I definitely probably have seen all of them, and I do remember when I was younger that we would sit down and watch different versions of the Scooby Doo franchise. Around the time I was in like kindergarten-ish. So I do remember that being like a part of our ritual, but I've seen most of this original series, Scooby Doo. Where are you? Although for me, I am most familiar with the 2002 series, What's New Scooby Doo.
I know, and believe it or not, I think Brandon, I think you introduced me to the West New Scooby Doo, so you may have been a little older than kindergarten, at least when you saw that version, because I do remember you watching it along with your brother and I, watching it at night, and I will say that I do remember, and I did like how, if I remember correctly, how the 2002 version kind of picked a little bit at the original version of the show. And so those I would love to be able to see again to kind of remember a little bit about what they picked at the show. But I do remember them kind of making a little fun of it. But at the same time, they were still mysteries.
Definitely. But I something I really like about this franchise is, before we go back to speaking about this series, an episode in particular, but something I love about this franchise is that it's always very familiar, but I feel like each different version sort of modernizes it a little bit. But overall, the characters, yeah, keep many of the same core traits, but allow for them to grow a bit. And so, even though years and decades have passed, it always feels like, we're just picking up where we left off.
Yeah, it does seem like that. And I guess I need to emphasize also that when the original, of course, came on, since it was 1969, the technology was not there at all. So it was kind of fun to watch how they actually solved the mysteries because they did have to do the legwork of going to the library or some other things that people don't quite do now.
Definitely. And speaking about this episode, I know for your top 10, we had definitely had a lot of questions and everything. And even now in regards to I mean, sort of the logistics of many of these hijinks that happen in this episode.
Yes, there are. There are quite a bit. And actually, Brandon, if I'm able to bring up, I had some pondering points. And so we kind of talked about this a little bit when I watched it. And I will admit to the audience that I'm not a big cartoon person. Even as a little person, when I was younger, I was not a cartoon person. So some of these, when I watch in reruns, especially when you guys were little, that I kind of start wondering what's really going on. And so I came up with some pondering points to think about while I was watching this particular episode. And I know that you're going to say, "Well, Mom, you're a little bit a little too deep as a cartoon," but you know, for consistency's sake, there were some things that just made me wonder a little bit. And so I'll just go over them. Feel free, Brandon, to interrupt as you need to. One of the things that I noticed first was the knight looked around while Mr. Wickles is the curator in the museum and the one who was ultimately the person who um, was the was the person who did everything. But anyway, while the group was talking, the knight looked around while Mr. Wickles is speaking. And so my question is, how, if Mr. Wickles is speaking and he's the culprit and they're looking at Mr. Wickles, how could the knight be looking? Like, who was in the knight costume at that time? Just points to ponder. Um, and then at some point in time in the episode, Velma decides to give Shaggy some medicine. Well, in the middle of this big scene, Velma just gets medicine to give to Shaggy. And so my question is, why did Velma have medicine on her, and why did she have a spoon? And she just gave it to Shaggy, and where did she do with it after she gave it to Shaggy? I don't know. These are just questions that just kind of hit me while I was watching the episode. And while this is going on, also the knight was of course following them, and he was on the ground, and she never said anything about the knight. So anyway, um, then we noticed that. Um, the group was concerned about what was going on in the museum, but they broke into the museum. Is that not a crime itself? That they broke into the museum and then just kind of broke things as they were walking around the museum. Um, And so, yes, they were investigating, but at the same time, they did break into the museum, and then they broke half the things in the museum as they were running around. At some point in time during the episode, the paint, they had paint and they threw it on the knight. Well, right afterwards, the paint disappeared off the knight. Just things to ponder about. And then you kind of wonder, how did the group call the sheriff? They did all of this, and then they said they need to call the sheriff, but we don't know. How did they call the sheriff? They were roaming around the museum. And then there were goons who were by the sheriff when the sheriff came, and Mr. Wickles was handcuffed, but the goons were not handcuffed. So the question is, who were these goons? And then, um, and then the overall question is, why did the sheriff believe the kids and not the owner of the museum? So just things to wonder about as you're kind of going through the episode. And I know it's way too deep for a cartoon, but Bran, as I was watching through, those are things I kind of noticed. Anything that you noticed that was just kind of odd?
Well, definitely, the things that you mentioned. And I think something that's important to remember too is that when this aired in 1969, while I do know that it aired a part of the Saturday morning cartoons that CBS had at the time, and so it may have rerun there, is that since home video didn't really exist yet, there was no way to really even watch the episodes to see the sort of inconsistencies that happen, such as with the knight, blinking even though the person who is the knight wasn't in the costume at the time. So some things like that you might have just not have thought about before that you can see now. And yeah, I mean, there's certainly some interesting parts. Yeah, I think the part that bothered me the most is that during the part where they were breaking into the museum, that Shaggy got onto a ladder to get up there, and then Fred somehow put the ladder on top of a car jack to get him up there. But wouldn't that have been kind of dangerous for Shaggy to already be up there on the top of the ladder, and then the ladder to be moved up and put under the jack? I mean, I know I'm thinking a bit much into this, but nevertheless, I really do enjoy this episode. Although it definitely was a longer 23 minutes.
Yeah, and that was something else that I noticed, that it seemed like we have watched shows that's 23 minutes and doesn't feel like 23 minutes. This seemed like a long 23 minutes. And so, and I don't know if that's as an adult watching it back or what, but it just seemed like a long 23 minutes.
But yeah, but something else to add on to this too is that this episode also had a laugh track.
Oh, yeah, it did. But I thought the laugh track kind of fit right in.
Yeah, it definitely gave me some reassurance that I was laughing at the right spots, because I was, although I think my laughs started a couple seconds before the laugh track did. But I think it definitely also shows a bit of the age of it for 1969. Although the animation looks really good and clear and crisp for it, and very consistent with the future iterations to come.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you there. The I had no problem with the animation. I thought the animation was great. Actually, for all versions of the series that I've seen, I think that the animation is really great, and you can see how it definitely improved if you watch the 2002 version. I think I've only seen bits and pieces of the one that came a little later, but the animation's always been really good for Scooby Doo.
Definitely. And speaking of that, the series is produced by Hanna-Barbera Productions, which is the production company of Joseph Barbera and William Hanna. And so the company lasted from 1957 to 2001 before becoming part of Warner Bros. And and yeah, I mean, I think that this studio had just produced so many amazing and legendary, animated franchises. Scooby Doo, of course, being one of them, and so it's tremendous to see that the work of the studio, even for this being 1969, has continued to the present day and has just become sort of like a household tradition, so to speak, for many people.
Yes, yes, it really is.
But yeah, but Mom, is there anything else that you wanted to say for Scooby Doo? Where are you?
Well, I want to talk about the theme song, Brandon,
Of
because we
course.
didn't talk about that. And of course, I absolutely love the theme song to Scooby Doo. And so I would give it an 8.5 out of the range. There were so many last night, we were able to watch the different versions of the Scooby Doo theme song. I think we found one that had like 13 minutes worth of versions of the Scooby Doo theme song. And so it was nice to see which one stood out for me as when I was younger, and which version I kind of liked or remembered. And so I really do like the theme song. What about you?
Yeah, I definitely really enjoyed the theme song for for this version, and I mean I feel like I like the ones for all of the versions for the most part, but but especially for this one, I think it really puts you into the to the feel of the episode, and yeah, I mean I think that I've practically have it memorized, and so it's just always a enjoyable watch to see the theme song of the show entering into Scooby Doo. Where are you?
Yes. One of the things I will say that I do like about Scooby Doo, and because it's a cartoon, and I don't do a lot of silly per se for cartoons, but I like that this particular cartoon or animated series actually could appeal to anyone watching it. And so there was enough of a true storyline to go with the storyline. It just wasn't silliness as a cartoon. There's a real storyline to go with the particular show.
Definitely. And like I said before, something I really enjoy is just like I said, the consistency of the story and how, throughout the different versions that you have a pretty good grasp as to who these characters are. And even for this first episode, even though that we're not given a traditional introduction, is that you go in already sort of like being thrown into the plot of that this isn't their first mystery and it won't be their last. And so I think it really allows for you to grasp onto okay, this is Scooby, this is Shaggy, this is Fred, and everything. And I'd say out of the core group though, that while it might appear that Fred is the leader, I definitely think that Shaggy was given the most characterization throughout this episode.
I think so too. Fred was to me was just the driver of the group, me literal driver, and so Fred was there to drive them around, and to kind of he sort of led them to places, but Shaggy was the one who kind of led them to a little bit more of the clues along with Velma.
Yeah, and so it makes me really curious too because definitely throughout the iterations of Scooby Doo, we oftentimes see Shaggy characterized as the more cowardly one, but I mean he seems to be the bravest out of all of them. He seems to be doing all the hard work here.
I know Shaggy appears goofy, but Shaggy kind of knows what he's doing.
Definitely. And speaking a little bit as to Fred too, yeah, Fred in this episode is voiced by Frank Welker, who has voiced Fred in practically almost every version of the entire Scooby Doo franchise, and even in the very rare instances that he's not Fred, he's usually is somebody else, like Fred's dad or something. So I mean, so I think that really helps to go for the consistency I was speaking about, for this amazing franchise.
Oh yeah, very true, Brandon.
But Mom, is there anything else that you wanted to say about this episode or the series?
I don't have anything else really to say about the episode of the series, just that Scooby Doo was one that I was able to endure and watch and enjoy as a young person and even as an adult. And, for those, and we have already, we'll let the audience know that we've already chosen the next three animated series that we're going to do for the month of April, but we still have 1 week left in the month of April that because it's 5 weeks. So if anyone has any suggestions of what we should do, just let us know.
Definitely. Please let us know. And yeah, I'm very excited for us to go through Animation April. This is going to be a very fun week for Tansson Talks TV, and I'm excited to continue with it with you, Mom.
Okay, yep. I'm excited to work with you too, Brandon.
Oh yeah, well, thank you so much for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. Have a great day.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.
Bye bye.